book?
Well, we have radically changed how we're projecting our power overseas. Instead of doing military and foreign aid work with government employees, we're now using private contractors to an unprecedented degree. We've got probably 260,000 contractors, more contractors than troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was struck by the pressure that's putting on our legal and regulatory oversight regime. We have to come up with a new mechanism for dealing with the things that are happening because it's putting tremendous pressure.
And do you say that because you believe that contractors, the extensive role that they're playing is here to stay, that we're only going to see more of it in the future with our conflicts or even with our aid work abroad?
Yes, and it's a somewhat controversial point, but I think we're so reliant on contractors now that that's the way of the future. And the use of contractors puts tremendous risk, puts public values, what I would call public values, at tremendous risk. And we've seen a lot of high-profile incidents of this, particularly cases involving private security contractors such as Blackwater, the shootings in Nisar Square, the use of contract interrogators at Abu Ghraib prison are very well-known examples. But there are lots of lesser-known examples. I interviewed uniformed military lawyers who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they said that there were at least 2 or 3 incidences of abuse of force a week by security contractors. So this is a real issue, and when we're looking at values like human dignity, limits on the use of force in armed conflict, as well as things like transparency and public participation, the use of these contractors put those values at risk.
Well, our government, as you said, perhaps now contractors are here to stay. Our government is highly dependent on hiring these contractors, but in any of your research, when you were preparing for this book, did you ask them, when you brought up these specific examples of Nisar Square, of Abu Ghraib, there have been other ones out there where they're buying prostitutes and buying drugs on government money, or perhaps pimping out young boys in Afghanistan. I mean, there are many really gruesome, horrible stories out there that our audience is familiar with. Did you ask these lawmakers how it is that they keep awarding them contracts that sometimes are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and how they do that in good conscience? Well,
nobody wants these abuses to take place, but the reality is that what I would call the ideology of privatization has made it very, very difficult to increase the government workforce, and it's very, very easy to add contractors because we have this idea that the private sector can do everything better. And in some cases, they probably can do it better. They can do things more cheaply, more efficiently, but in a lot of cases, they can't. And when we outsourced our domestic functions, healthcare, prison management, we had a big public debate about precisely that. That never happened in the foreign policy arena, and nobody did the math either. So we outsourced all these functions without actually calculating whether or not it was going to save us money. And in fact, the Commission on Wartime Contracting recently noted that we lost billions of dollars under the log cap contract for logistics in Iraq because we didn't have sufficient oversight of the contracting process.
So not only now are we involved in 2 wars, but at the same time we are outsourcing our wars, and the American public really has absolutely no say about it. But do you think that some of these contractors end up being demonized also from the stories that we hear, that there are good guys out there doing good work? We've spoken with a number of contractors too that I believe in good faith are doing good work and are risking their lives every day. But these are the stories, the bad stories are the ones that you hear.
More than 1,000 contractors have died. And certainly, there are plenty of contractors who are doing their job honorably. The problem is that our system for oversight and accountability is broken. It doesn't work. And so one of the things I do in the book is I identify specific things that we can do to try to improve respect for public values in an era of privatization.
What are some of those things?
So first of all, we need to expand the jurisdiction of our courts to handle cases that go bad, to improve accountability when contractors cross the line. And there's some important gaps in that legislation, and we need to fix that. So we need to pass the Contractor Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act. But we also need to enforce the laws that we have better. Part of the problem is the authority to prosecute cases lies with the U.S. attorneys who are all around the country. They don't have the incentives or the expertise to do this. We need to have a centralized place within the Department of Justice with people who have the expertise and the training to do this. And then we've got to require that office to report to Congress so that people can stay on top of what's happening. Then on contract management and oversight, you know, I did a comparison of the contracts, the foreign affairs contracts and domestic privatization contracts. And the foreign affairs contracts fall far short. The terms are shockingly vague. There have been some improvements, but we need to specify with greater rigor the kind of training that these contractors need, for example. 80% of the contractors are not U.S. citizens, which makes training and vetting a huge problem, but a crucial issue that contracting can solve. And we need to have better oversight management of the contracts. We've doubled the contracts, but we've reduced our contract workforce. And it's not sexy, and there's very little constituency for it. But we've got to have people out there overseeing these contracts, otherwise we're going to lose a lot of money.
Now, very quickly, I want to ask what you think of this Raymond Davis case that's going on in Pakistan. Of course, the government was at first didn't want to admit that he, in fact, is a contractor for the CIA. They said he was our diplomat. Now, it turns out that he is a CIA contractor, but that means that we have contractors who we're essentially paying to spy and whom we're trying to protect with diplomatic immunity. Does that open a whole other Pandora's box of issues?
Yeah, and arguably he's not really entitled to diplomatic immunity, and we don't know all the facts, but if he crossed the line and engaged in an act that we would consider to be a crime, it shows how we don't have the appropriate legal accountability framework in place, because we wouldn't have jurisdiction. Our courts wouldn't have jurisdiction over him because the crime took place overseas, and he's not a Defense Department contractor, and he's not in a particular U.S. facility. So if we passed CJA, then our courts would have jurisdiction. Right now, the only venue for any criminal accountability, assuming there is criminal responsibility, would be in Pakistan. And host nation courts are often not going to be able to deliver fair justice in a case like this.
Well, we know that it wouldn't be the results that our government would be looking for. Laura, thanks so much for joining us. I do hope that somebody listens to your suggestions here on how to create this legal framework. And I guess whether they abide by it would be the next question. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.